Hello, hello. Welcome back to B and J's Little Farm. We got Firefly in the house. Hello, hello. Welcome in. Just setting up here behind the scenes so I can see the chat. All right, there we go. We got two in the house watching. All right, you guys, we are on Wings of the Dream, and we are on chapter 43. Hey, Brian, good to see you. We just got, I believe, two more chapters tonight, and that is it. Nope, we got, might be three. Yeah, we got three more chapters in the book. Is it over, you guys? Ah. All right, so we're just gonna jump in to chapter 43. 3 days later, Janie screamed in protest as I lowered her into the crib for an afternoon nap. Her arms frailed towards me as if she knew that I had but 2 weeks left to hold her. It's okay, baby. I savored her arms around my neck as she calmed, but when I tried to return her to the bed, her hysteria began again. No words yet, just tears. If only she could tell me what was wrong, but she couldn't. So I climbed into the bed the children shared, Janie still clinging to my neck. I'll sleep too, Janie. She calmed and curled into the crook of my body as if she belonged there. The sun streaked through the closed window, warming the room. After a few minutes, her breathing and evened. I relaxed my eyelids and they grew heavy. It's Remton's not actually in here, Brian. It's me. I'm using his phone. He's upstairs watching a movie. The bellow of the car horn caught me just before sleep. I eased out of bed, raced downstairs, and threw open the front door, eager to stop the noise and keep Janie napping. Arthur. My breath stilled in my chest as fear crawled up my back. Hadn't he received my letter? He stood beside a large touring car, one hand on the horn, one foot crossed casually over the other. The old Arthur, full of swagger, in a Dapper suit instead of an army uniform, hat tipped back on his head, satisfied smile on his face. I'm here. He opened his arms. I shrank back. Uncle Sam's through with me for good. He slowly walked up until he stood with one foot on the porch step. I'm a real civilian again. Mother is so pleased that I'm getting married. She bought me a new suit and a new car. Didn't you? Didn't you get my letter? My fingers gripped one another, twisting like the knot in my stomach. Oh, little girl, you didn't think I took that seriously, did you? You should have. I meant every word. He ambled up the steps. Come on, it's Valentine's Day. You know you're my best girl, Rebecca. I crossed my arms and retreated closer to the door. I don't know that, Arthur. All I know is you had a fiance and now you don't. You seem to think you can exchange one girl for another, the same way you changed from a uniform to a new suit. His eyes took on a wariness. I'd noticed the last time he visited. He inched towards me. But you have to marry me, Rebecca. What'll mother say if you don't? That isn't really my concern, is it? His eyes narrowed, his expression suddenly menacing. But she thinks I'm getting married. I, not we. An idea swirled soft as fresh taffy. I pulled it this way and that. Then I cocked my head and stared straight into his eyes. Did you tell her about me or about the other girl? As the thought hardened like cold sugar, I stepped boldly toward him. Did your mother make promises about when you married that you want her to keep? Then your fiance left you? Is that it? Is that why you come running back to me? He backed away, eyes wide, mouth gaping. I nodded in the direction of his car. Was that part of the deal? And the clothes? Maybe a business proposition as well? Am I right, Arthur? Am I? A movement caught the corner of my eye. Frank rounding the corner of the house, baseball and glove in hand, and the boys caravanning around his feet. Hello there. Frank stopped just beyond us and handed the ball and glove to a speechless James. I don't believe we met. My lips felt stiff as wood planks. This is Arthur Sampson. Arthur, meet Frank Gresham. Arthur's eyes narrowed as Frank came forward, hand extended. Arthur slipped me a sideways glance, his face brightening. Ah, the children's father. So nice to meet you, Mr. Gresham. He pumped Frank's hand. I know Rebecca is glad to have you back. He slid up to me, planted his arms around my waist, and pinned me to his side. We've been waiting for your return. You see, we're engaged to be married. Frank's smile shifted a bit as his eyes sought mine. You should have said something when I arrived home, Rebecca. I'd hate to think I made a man wait a minute longer than necessary to take a wife. I pursed my lips and ripped myself from Arthur's possessive grasp, wishing my glare could consume him like fire. I am not engaged to this man. I told him we were through. I have no idea why he's come here. He has no business with me. Frank's blue eyes turned stormy when he looked at Arthur. Is that true? Well, Arthur fidgeted with the laps on his jacket and straightened his tie. I didn't think she really meant it. His old grin returned, as if he and Frank had a long history of friendship between them, lovers spat and all. His arm went positively around me again. I tried to spin away, but he held me fast, his fingers digging into my side. You know how women are, always saying one thing and meaning another. I freed myself from his grasp, fists clenched, chest heaving like an angry bull. Frank stepped between us, the chiseled muscles in his arms flexing tight beneath his rolled up shirtless sleeves. I don't believe I know that, son. Seems to me women generally say what they mean. At least my wife always did, and I haven't known Rebecca to do any differently. I peeked over Frank's shoulder in time to witness the cool drain from Arthur's face, leaving his appearance more like a statue instead of a man. He backed down the dirt walkway, crashing into the fence, feeling behind him for the gate, then for the door of his shiny car. Yes, sir, maybe I was wrong, sir. One corner of my mouth lifted as Arthur inched around the front of the car and reached for the door. You need some help with that? The amusement in Frank's voice made me imagine the twinkle in his eye. No, thank you. Arthur sat behind the steering wheel, looking like a little boy caught smoking in a hayloft. The gears ground as he turned the car to head back toward town. Frank raised his hand. Sure was nice to meet you. I stood next to my protector as Arthur's tires kicked up a swirl of dust around us. I hope I didn't frighten your young man. Frank stared after the car. He's not my young man. Frank turned slowly, eyebrows raised, as if questioning that I spoke the truth. My bravado deflated as quickly as a punctured tire. Excuse me. I thought he was once, but I realized a while ago that I was wrong. I hesitated suddenly, embarrassed by the whole affair. James pushed between us. Can we play ball now, Daddy? Frank kept his eyes locked on me for a long moment before he tousled his son's hair. Anytime you're ready, son. The next Saturday, dawn cleared and warm, like spring burning in her new dress, with a light step and a tune on my lips. I worked back and forth from stove to table, bacon and eggs and biscuits and gravy. Whatever had possessed me to stir up such a breakfast? Frank rubbed his hands together as he slid into his chair at the head of the table. Woohoo! Smells like Christmas. Daddy, Ollie scolded. Christmas smells like cinnamon, not bacon and biscuits. Frank laughed as he tucked a napkin into his shirt. So it does, Ollie. So it does. But I'm thinking this breakfast smells mighty fine, too. Janie squawked and reached for a biscuit. Ollie broke one open and laid it within her sister's reach. I set a new ball of butter on the table and took my seat. Frank blessed our food before he filled his son's plates. It felt so right, the six of us around the table enjoying a meal. I set my elbows on the table, rested my chin on my clasped hands, and watched. Frank tipped his head, his question as clear as if he had spoken. What? His gesture said. Why are you looking at us like that? I shrugged, my answer hoping the truth wasn't apparent in my eyes. He picked up his coffee, washed down his eggs, and cleared his throat. I thought we'd make a trip into Terrell today. All of us? Ollie nearly shouted. That's right, honey, all of us. Ollie's head whipped in my direction. Terrell, Rebecca. Her wide eyes told me this was a pleasure she'd experienced before, one she longed for again. How does that sound, Rebecca? Frank's words turned all eyes in my direction. Think you can get us ready? I laid down my fork, breakfast suddenly, a rock in my stomach. Did he mean this as a farewell party? Maybe he'd tell the children that 2 weeks from today I'd board the train and ride back out of their lives. Frank grinned at me and pushed his plate away. I let out a long breath and managed an answering smile. I'll have us ready. Ollie will help. Me too. The boys' words tangled with each other. Frank slapped his hands on his leg and stood. I best get my chores done then. As he left the kitchen, I grabbed his empty plate along with my half-empty one. Terrell might not be quite as big as Dallas, but according to the things I've heard, it had a slight more to offer either Downington or Prater's Junction, and if I were doomed to live out my days in Downington, I would let this last opportunity for excitement pass me. Wouldn't let this last opportunity for excitement pass me by. Hey, Lyle, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. We rode into Terrell behind a skittish dandy. We weren't the only ones in a horse and buggy. And will you change along with them? I'll adapt to the lasting changes, but it might take me some time to figure out what those really are. I considered his words as the jangle of a harness and the creak of leather intertwined with the chug of motors. Just as the smell of gasoline mingled with that all right, there it goes. It said it was having trouble connecting. Sorry about that. Yeah, it was frozen. All right. Now I wonder if it held more wisdom than my desire for everything new and flashy. Of course, if this bond election for new roads comes out right, I might be tempted to jump right into the automobile craze. I shot up a silent prayer for voters on their way to the polls, then reapproached myself. I wouldn't be here to enjoy new roads anyway, let alone any automobile Frank might be persuaded to purchase. Sandy walked further into the heart of the city, my head turned this way and that, craning to see every possible sight Terrell offered. A large hotel, several groceries and drugstores, auto shops and harness makers, almost side by side. The train depot. Oh, what's that? I pointed towards a large building fronted with massive columns. Hey Firefly, welcome back. That notification button don't work. Carnegie Library, Frank said. Mama took me there once. Ollie whispered from the back. I bit my lip, wishing my comment hadn't elected that response. And yet, that was the truth of the matter. They'd had a mama, one that only Ollie and James and possibly Dan remembered. I swallowed hard and I glanced at Frank. His face had no discernible expression. What do you remember about it, honey? I asked Ollie. Rows and rows of books, and being shushed a lot. I laughed. I couldn't help myself. My mama would have shushed me too, I imagine. We rolled on down Moore Street. Then Frank turned and hitched Jandy to a post, and we climbed from the buggy. Frank sat Janie on his shoulder. She clapped and grinned. I caught Dan by the hand. People swarmed before the storefronts. I felt certain I gawked like a country girl as we clomped up and down the broad sidewalks, my arms swinging with Dan's. My day in Dallas hadn't been filled with such wonder, only with expectations and then disappointment. But today, Ollie and James walked beside me, wide-eyed and excited, and I couldn't help but join in their enthusiasm. We ended our Mendelings at the sofa fountain, or Mendelings at the soda fountain. With my handkerchief, I wiped away the dirt that had collected on our sweet faces before we stepped inside. Frank ordered 3 sodas. I shared with Janie, Frank with Dan, and Ollie with James. As we rested and laughed, the contentment on each face both freed and squeezed my heart. James slurped up the remaining drops in his glass and let out a long sigh. Good day, son. James nodded. A family day. I held my breath and let my gaze rest on Frank's face for only an instant before my trembling hands focused with Janie's dress. He had nothing but smiles for his son. What did it mean? Did he like the idea of us as a family? Maybe just seeing his children's happiness had sparked his own. I beat back hope, reminded myself that it wasn't me he wanted. He slapped his hand against his knee and stood. We best be on our way back before the sun decides it's worked long enough and heads to bed. Daddy, Dan grabbed his father's hand. You know the son doesn't have a bed. Oh, his forehead wrinkled as he gazed into his son's upturned face. Doesn't it? No. Becca says it goes to the other side of the world at night time. Does she now? His eyebrows rose in my direction. Why in the world did I blush and turn away? Well, let's race home, shall we? The children nodded to sleep one by one. As Dandy's pace steadied us home again, I kept quiet, as did Frank. Had had James' comment disturbed us both? The thought made my head hurt, for I couldn't discern the answer. So instead, I wondered about Mama. I hadn't heard a peep from her since she'd arrived back in Downington. I expected a long letter detailing my youthful foolishness for remaining with Frank's family, but none arrived. Had Daddy stayed her hand, or was she simply not speaking to me? And did it matter? There I go again. But in spite of her suggestions, I couldn't find the peace I sought. Whether she recognized it or not, I had my own life to live, my own decisions to make. The Lord wanted me to hear him and obey. But as day passed into day, I found myself afraid to ask for his direction. For more and more, I wondered if he'd side with Mama and tell me to come. He'd side with Mama and tell me to be content to go back home. I've been praying for you, Irene said at church the next morning. Her face didn't hold the same laughter as it had before Beulah's passing. It had turned serious and searching. I squirmed in my seat, for the first time uncomfortable with my friend. She sat beside me. How are things at the house? fine, but I couldn't meet her eyes. I smoothed my skirt, crossed my ankles, pulled my hand back closer to my body. She placed a hand on mine. I'm still praying. I nodded without looking up, my gaze stuck on her hand until it moved away from view. Then the sheriff stood at the end of the pew. Rebecca, with a small shake, I tossed off my melancholy and offered him my brightest grin. He returned it, tucked my head in the crook of his arm, and escorting me from the church into the gray day. More winter than spring. May I stop by this week? His eager eyes terrified me. I needed to tell him I'd be leaving soon. Well, I guess that would be fine. What could I say? Please don't ask of me what I can't give. Maybe I imagined the question in his eyes after all. Maybe he just needed a friend. I laid my free hand on his arm. Please come. It's always a pleasure. Hey, Darren, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. We're on chapter 44. I believe that's the last one. Nope, we got one more after that. Sheriff Jeffries knocked at the kitchen door just after supper and the next evening, his hat turning in his hands, his tongue swiping across his lips. Frank and the children retreated to the parlor as I poured coffee and sat across the table from Henry, my heart thumping a frantic pace. It had been a long time since I had felt so uncomfortable in his presence. I've been thinking. He stared into his cup as if he could read the next words on the dark, shifting surface. Frank's low laughter drifted in from the parlor. My feet longed to run to him, to hear what childish antic had brought amusement, but I stayed in my seat. Henry pulled up a paper from the inside pocket of his jacket and slid it across the table. What's this? I unfolded it, and my breath caught at the words, a Texas Ranger. He nodded, pride shining in his eyes. It's all because of you, Rebecca. Me? I bit my lip to hold back the tears. Henry would get to live his dream. I'd have never tried if you hadn't encouraged me. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand before I realized what I had done. I let go fast, as if I'd touched a frozen water pump handle barehanded. But he held on. I love you, Rebecca. I think I have since the moment I caught you on the train platform. I held my breath, wishing I didn't have to disappoint this man. Come with me. Marry me. His eyes radiated hope. And there at Irene. Jeffries had adventuresome dreams, but he wanted someone to be coddled and cared for, like Clara Graham. I wasn't sure I could be that, just as I could never seem to be the docile mom. Wishing I could soften the hurtful words. I as each other, Henry. We'd come to despise each other, I think, eventually. He shook it, his head shook. We wouldn't, Rebecca. I'd do whatever you wanted, be whatever you wanted. Such opposite of Arthur, humble. That's the problem, Henry. You shouldn't have to change for me. Why couldn't I return his affection? Why did the Lord doom my heart to care for those who didn't care for me? Everything's all right, Frank, and mine blue eyes deep with passion and love for his family. I pushed away from the table and I ran out the door, all the way to the barn. I grouped through the dark interior, hearing Dandy and Tom and Huck gabbling in the corral, old Bob mooing from her stall. I lifted my skirts, charged up the ladder and into the hayloft, and I wept, wondering if I had just turned down my very last chance at love. I kept myself apart from the family after counting 11 days remaining on my paper. Frank didn't ask any questions. He just grabbed 3 squares of cornbread and a cup of coffee and returned to the barnyard or the fields. He didn't bother to tell me which. I was glad to escape him, for no matter how I chinned my heart, It continued to race in his presence. He'd already made it clear he had no intentions towards me, and now I'd refused two eligible young men who did. Perhaps he thought me young and foolish. Perhaps he wished I would leave. After all, forever. Yet I saw no evidence that he intended to take a wife to mother them either. What was his plan? My disconcerting thoughts set me to slamming pots and barking orders. Courage stirred until I believed I would spew all my words the minute he walked in the door. But I knew how he'd react. He'd stand there quietly, smiling shyly as if he didn't want to offend, leaving me to bite my lip and turn away in hopes he wouldn't see the flush creeping up my neck. A whole week I endured, until I imagined my heart would burst from my chest. Something had to change, and it seemed I needed it to be the one to make it happen. Ollie skipped off to school that morning. James and Dan raced out the door, closed behind. Stop, I called. Their shoulders hunched and heads hung as they turned back. Take Janie with you. Why? James asked. Because I said so. I led her to the porch, put her hand in James's. He huffed his displeasure, but Dan bent low, his hands on his knees, his face near Janie's. You can be the bad guy, okay? I wanted to laugh and cry as they helped her down the steps, but I also wanted this infernal waiting to end. I needed I needed it to end. They turned the corner, headed for the front yard. I ran into the opposite direction, to the garden behind the house. In the far corner among the soil Frank had readied for planting, I dropped to my knees and covered my face. I've waited so long, Lord. What do you want from me? My weak and weary heart cried for help as the cool morning warmed, but I didn't move. I prayed, desperate for direction. The Lord had brought me to this place, to this family. Aunt Annabel had been sure of it, and so had I, until the moment I believed he'd asked me to stay too. But the unwelcome new stirrings, but the unwelcome new stirrings inside me couldn't be denied. I had no desire to torture Henry Jeffries or Frank, one who wanted me and one who didn't. And I had no desire to bring further heartache to the children either. But they needed me, didn't they? Or did I just wish that they did? The longer I prayed and the more I sensed what had to be. Why is doing the right thing so hard, Lord? He didn't answer back, but he knew all about my struggle. He'd sweat his own blood over the agony of his obedience. Take no thought for the morrow. I took a deep breath, brushed the dirt off from my skirt, walked back into the house, and started dinner. I knew what I had to do, though it rankled all the same. But fresh air and a stretch of the legs would do me some good. I could walk to town at leisure, not in haste like the day Dan cut open his head. I would enjoy the solitude, the exercise, and the last of the winter scented air. And when I arrived in town, I'd send a Western Union telegram to Mama and Daddy to let them know I was coming home. Skip to page. I set the pork chops on the kitchen table, but I didn't sit. Instead, I pulled off my apron and donned my hat. I hope you don't mind, but I have some errands that must be done in town. I won't be long. Frank and the boys looked stunned, but didn't protest, and so I hurried away, enjoying the journey much less than I had tried to convince myself I would. The telegram didn't take long to write. Arriving tomorrow, Rebecca. No other explanation needed. A man I didn't recognize copied down the telegram. Thankfully, no one else stood by to wonder about my business. I fumbled for the money in the pocketbook. Daddy's money, plenty to cover the telegram and any cost to charge the train ticket. I ought to offer the rest to Frank for Dallas and for the Christmas presents, or maybe I could send it back later. My bottom lip trembled just a bit. I caught it with my teeth. No one must suspect my agony, like leaving a limb behind, or five. I had heard whispered stories about men with amputated limbs, how they still hurt long after the appendage was severed and, and buried. It would be the same with my heart, a lingering ache for Frank and his children, no matter how long they'd been gone from my sight. Frank could hire another housekeeper, someone like my aunt. He could live in his own house, sleep in his own bed, be with his children day and night, and I suppose I'd survive, even though my heart felt like an old dress Mama had ripped to pieces to make a rug. I imagine myself as that dress, once a pretty thing to be admired, now destined to be trampled beneath dirty feet. More time, I whispered to myself as the road to the house both pulled and repelled me. I wished I had more time. Deep breaths calmed me on the outside. Measured steps took me to Mr. Crenshaw's store. The remainder of Daddy's money clutched in my hand. Mr. Crenshaw peered past me as I entered. Alone today? Then I noticed Sheriff Jeffries. He doffed his hat and scooted past. I watched him go, swallowing down the ache in my throat. How can I help you? Mr. Crenshaw's friendly face brought me back to my task. Peppermint sticks, please. And my gaze swept over the shelves. Two combs, a lace handkerchief, and a lace bib. I laid Daddy's remaining bills on the counter. Maybe the trinkets would soften the blow. After Mr. Crenshaw had wrapped my purchases, my dawning excuses vanished. Heavy steps carried me back toward Frank Gressham's farm. I let my shoulders drop and my feet drag as I traveled the lonely road. Aunt Annabelle's face intruded into my musings, purplish blotches on a bloodless background, a woman from all accounts who loved people, especially this family. In fact, she'd used the last of her earthly breath to command them to me. God sent you, words that had both sustained and challenged me. Hey Carl, good to see you. I knew Mama loved me too, but I dreaded returning to her brand of affection. Yet after these months of caring for the children, I could imagine some of the love behind Mama's actions. And I wondered if in this experience came my chance to be different, to let go of the ones I loved in spite of my longings to keep them close, to trust all of our futures to the Lord, not to my own plans. The farmhouse appeared as I rounded the bend, no longer unfamiliar. Now every porch and window and square of the yard held a memory. My chest ached, but my will stood firm. Come morning, I'd announce my plans to catch the train home. It would be easier that way. No time for the children to work themselves into a tizzy. No time for anyone to try to change my mind. I'd make my goodbyes in my own way, like Will had. Remember my brother's grace in the midst of his own personal tragedy made me proud. I wanted to be as strong as him. I circled around a carefree smile before gliding through the kitchen door. I'm home, and I brought presents. Faces lit with contagious excitement. Frank as bright as the sun. And oh, how I wish this could be my real life. I packed by the light of the moon. An owl hooted far away, and a whippoorwill answered. Kneeling beside the narrow window sill, I laid my cheek against the cool pale pane of glass. If I had known what would happen, that a stranger's children would weave their way into my heart and change everything, would I have come? Being a farmer's wife and a mother hadn't been the dream of my heart. How could I have known it would become what I wanted, what I needed? That October night before I left home seemed years ago. I'd been a different girl then, But if I truly believed God cared for every detail of my life, and I did, I had to believe He preferred this to me. Sorry, the cat caught my eye. And I did. I had to believe He preferred this me to the old one. After one last fleeting look into the heavens, I slipped into bed, closed my eyes, and let dreams come as they would. I didn't have the heart to them up anymore. Chapter 45 in our last chapter. London showed its above the horizon planks into the range's firebox and made myself a cup of tea instead of coffee. It was a good thing. Everyone in Downingtown would make a fuss over me, like they did over anyone returning from a long visit. The hot honey laced tea coated my throat and kept back the tears that hovered so near. I'd make a big breakfast and would leave dinner cooking too. The last time I'd made dinner for them all. I squeezed my eyes shut and banished all thought of last times. I I cherished those memories on the train with the world whizzing past. Strangers would watch my tears and wonder, but not ask. By the time I reached Downingtown, I'd put on a happy mask forever. Is it morning already? Ollie slumped at the table, rubbing her eyes. Yes, but very early morning, I said. I'm sorry if I woke you. You didn't. James kicked me. I don't think I can sleep with those boys anymore. I'm too big, and they're too rowdy. I slid a pan of biscuits into the oven before giving the gravy a stir and moving it to a place away from the heat. Don't worry, honey. You won't have to put up with them much longer. I wanted to clap my hand over my mouth, but I held still, hoping she wouldn't take any meaning from my words. But she did. Her mouth dropped. You mean I can move into your room with you? I turned to the stove and whipped the gravy around and around with a fork. I needed to tell her the truth, but I wasn't yet ready. The fork split. I gathered my thoughts, measured my words. Yes, honey, you can move into my room soon. She squealed. I shushed her. She threw her arms around my waist and laid her cheek against my back. What's got you so excited, Ollie girl? Frank's cheerful words punched me in the stomach. Ollie let go, her feet tearing across the floor. Oh, Daddy, Rebecca says I can move into her room. I don't have to sleep in that big bed with the boys anymore. Did she now? I could tell Frank wanted me to look at him, wanted to ask questions with his eyes, but I dared not turn. He'd read what I intended to do, and I wasn't quite ready for that. My fork whirled faster. Maybe my agitation would mean lumpless gravy. What's going on? Dan and James closed at his heel, and quick as butter melting on a hot stove, life moved forward. I cooked and served and ate, soaking in each voice, each laugh, each turn of the head, saving them up for when I need them most. But I didn't speak. I didn't look at Frank in the face either. Dishwashing brought a relief. I could gaze out the window instead of at the family, but my hands crumbled with the familiar task. A tin plate clattered to the floor before I could plunge it beneath the dishwater. I stooped to pick it up. Ollie glanced at me as she clinked another clean cup on the shelf. I sure am clumsy this morning. I tried to laugh, but it came out more of a nervous twitter. I had to tell Frank before Ollie left for school. It wouldn't do to say no goodbye at all. I just couldn't bear a long one. Go on now, get your books together. She jumped off the small stool and hurried away. I dried my hands and took a deep breath. Nothing to be nervous about, I told myself. Oh, Lord Jesus. It was as close to a prayer as I could manage without falling to pieces. The Lord knew what I needed: strength, courage, faith, that He had some future for me that would assure the current pain in my heart. I walked the familiar path to the barn, stopped in the doorway, Squinted into the darker center of the building. Old Bob mooed. I took it as her goodbye. Might I speak with you for a minute, Frank? He stopped working. James, Dan, keep Janie out of trouble. Yes, sir. Both boys gave a salute. Frank's long legs consumed the expanse, and he met me in the bright sunlight. We rounded the corner of the barn and moved away from its wall, closer to the pig pen. Is there a problem? He bent slightly, resting his arms on the top of the rail fence surrounding the sty, one foot propped up on the lower slat. I picked up a jagged edge of a fingernail and cleared my throat. I'm going home. I know. He looked almost stricken, but it passed. Worried about not having made arrangement yet for the children, I imagine. He cleared his throat, kicked at the clod of dirt at the end of the month. This morning, actually, I had my train ticket. Only his jaw moved, the muscle tightening and loosening and tightening again. I, I paced behind him, reached the other side of the small enclosure, chewed my lip, waited for him to say something, anything. But the silence closed in around me. I had to get free of it. I've been here long enough. I know that now. You need to be with your family, Frank. You need to sleep in your own bed, be among your own things. The children are comfortable with you again. Besides, I grabbed the top rail of the pen to hold me steady. I had my own life to live. I stared off into the distance, hoping he thought I gazed happily into the life I desired. The quiet boiled between us until his words spat out like a flash of lightning. Just like that, you'd abandoned us? I whirled to face him. Just a few days earlier than you promised to send me home, remember? He shoved his hands into his pockets of his overalls and looked me over as if I were a possum in the bedroom. They've lost their mother and Annabelle. Now they'll lose you too. You don't think they'll feel that? I shook my head, my heart breaking into tiny shards. They're young. They'll take to whoever you bring in as quickly as they took to me. His face reddened. He stalked towards the barn, then turned and came back, pointing his finger in my face. Let's get this straight. I've not asked you to leave. You've taken this on yourself. It's for the best, Frank. It really is. But I hesitated. The intensity of his anger made me unsure of my final request. My voice shrank to nearly a whisper. Will you tell them for me? His eyebrows arched. He threw back his head and bleached a derisive laugh. You want you want to leave? Fine. I can't stop you, but I'm not going to be the one to tell them. You are. Hey Steve, good to see you. Jen, good to see you. Thank you, Brian. Brian gifted a membership. Awesome. Oh, and I went to Celtic Grandma. Thank you so much. Good to see you, Vermont. Thanks for coming in. He stomped to the barn. I fumed back to the house. Coward, I muttered underneath my breath. I wasn't sure if I meant for him or for me. I knew I had to tell Ollie before she left for school. It would be a quick pain, like pulling the dressing from a wound. I had to say it now before I lost my nerve. Ollie, I called up the stairs. Yes, ma'am. Are you ready to leave? Instead of answering, she skipped down the stairs, jumping over the last two steps into my unsuspecting arms. I caught her, but barely. Oh my, you're too big for me to catch you like that. She grinned up at me. I know, but sometimes I wish I was little again. I hugged her to me for a long moment, then held her way. I retied the ribbons on the bottoms of her braids. You look adorable, Ollie Elizabeth. I took her hand and led her out the front door. You be good at school today. My courage warned, but the words had to be said. I took a deep breath. I won't be here this afternoon, Ollie. I'm going home to Oklahoma to my mama and daddy. She cocked her head, a quizzical expression on her face. When are you coming back? I'm not. I'm not coming back to live here. I'll come to visit maybe, and you can come visit me. Her head separated from mine. She stared at me, her mouth hanging open. But we need you, Rebecca. I shook my head. No, you don't. Your daddy will take care of you, I promise. Hey, Dragon, good to see you. You can't go. Tears dripped down her pale cheeks, her voice escalating into hysteria. You can't leave us. Then I noticed the back door standing open. James and Dan gaping at their sister, confusion screwing up their faces. Frank stood behind them, Janie in his arms. I wanted to crawl in a hole. It wasn't supposed to go like this. My lips trembled, looking for words to comfort them, to comfort me. James bolted through the hallway and wrapped his arms around Ollie, buried his head in her chest. I squatted down in front of them, determined to hold back my emotions, but sensing them rising out of control, the children weren't supposed to care as much as I did. I laid my hand on the back of James's head as if giving him a blessing. Goodbye, little man. I'll miss you. Me too. Dan bowed into me now. Janie toddled behind. You too, Dan? I wrapped my arm around him, my nose near the scruffy skin of his neck. I breathed in the particular little boy's scent, like a wet dog in a closed room. Then I left Janie and kissed her nose before setting her back on the floor. I retrieved my suitcase from where I had stashed it in the dining room, and I raised a hand to he even a collective howl rose up behind me. I wanted to run, but turned back in spite of myself. The four children stood near the road now, bawling and squalling, faces molded red, words pleading. A torrent of tears rushed toward release as I forced myself, leading feet toward town. Then Janie's baby voice rose above the din. Mama! My steps halted. So did my heart. The plaintive cry filled every crevice of my being. Mama! I ceased. I turned. Ollie's horror-stricken face told me I heard right. Gripping the handle of my suitcase and clenching my teeth, I tried to hold in my own kneeling. Janie dropped to her pudgy knees in the middle of the road. Mama! She fell on her face in the dirt and sobbed. My gaze rose past her to Frank, who stood at the top of the steps. His horror seemed to mirror my own. I thought by leaving I'd alleviate his suffering, but it seemed I'd only deepened it. He made his way across the yard, his eyes fixed on mine. He passed his frozen children as if they were merely trees in a human forest, and stopped in front of me. So close I could smell old Bob on his shirt. I tilted my head back, looked into his face, my heart bumping against my chest, though I had felt sure it had stopped beating altogether. His arms reached for me, then fell back to his sides. Please, Rebecca, please stay. They need you. I told you that. I can't. My vision blurred as I shook my head. His thumb caught a tear on my cheek, wiped it dry. I glanced at Janie, still laying, heartbroken in the dirt. I ached to go to her, but I didn't want to make things worse. Ollie seemed to read my thoughts. She picked up her sister, but her attention remained on me. I looked back at Frank. Can't you see? I'm giving you life back, giving you your life back, your whole life, your house, your family. I tasted the salt of my tears. He grabbed my shoulders. But don't you understand, Rebecca? I can't have my whole life back. When I left for the war, I knew nothing would ever be the same. And it isn't. Clara is gone. I have to make a new life now. He sucked in a deep breath. And I want to make it with you. Me? Are you saying? I held my breath, holding the words inside, afraid they'd meet the air and burst like a soap bubble. His lips curled into a smile that chased every trace of gray from his eyes. Marry me? A screech overhead drew my gaze to the sky. A hawk soared lazy circles far above me. Ollie's rope-skipped rhythm from school chanted in my head. I had a little bird. Its name was Eliza. I opened the window, and it flew in. Eliza. Influenza had swooped down like a hawk on a field mouse and changed the entire direction of my life. Though she'd also ripped the veil from my eyes, I suddenly saw my heart clearly, like my reflection in a mirror instead of the surface of a pond. Before, my dreams involved moving away from what I didn't want instead of moving toward a true desire, away from the mundane, away from Mama's directiveness. Now I could see what my heart wanted all along, a family to cherish and love, a simple home to call my own, a life lived fully every moment, a savoring of joy, even a relishing of pain, because it proved my existence on this earth, not some flight above it. Ollie took a step towards us, Janie filling her arms. Frank loosened his grip on my shoulders, his eyes searching mine. I came home afraid of being alone, but I wasn't alone. You were here. Yeah, it keeps freezing every once in a while, so I'll quit reading when it freezes, and then when it unfreezes, I'll read again. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on with it. He put his hands on his hips, laughed, shook his head. You aspirate me sometimes, Rebecca. No doubt about that. But you made me feel alive, and you taught my heart to love again. I never expected it to happen so soon. My suitcase dropped to the ground with a thud, but my mouth refused to move. He laid his hand on my cheek. I leaned into it, closed my eyes. A breeze swept past me, scented with the promise of spring, but this time I had no desire to fly on its freckled path. This time my feet remained contently at topsoil ground. Well, we'll never be rich or modern, but we have lots of love to give. He moved closer, his body almost touching mine. My eyes flew open as joy curled up from my toes, lifting my mouth into a smile. I can't think of anything more I could ask for. Then a giggle rose up through my tears. I bit my lip, but it refused to stay inside, except maybe an automobile of my own. Frank's laughter rang across the black land prairie. I'll even teach you to drive it, I promise. His arms circled my his arms circled me, pulled me close. The children danced around us, cheering happily. And the moment Frank's lips touched mine, I knew that in this seemingly ordinary life, I'd encountered nothing less than one adventure after another. The end. I hope you guys enjoyed. So good. I thought it was so good anyway. But yeah, that was the end of this one. So I'm gonna have to find us another one to read. Hopefully by next Saturday. I don't know. We'll see. I want to thank you all so much for coming out on your Saturday to spend it with me to read Wings of a Dream. Thanks, Dragon. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I hope that you guys are having an awesome weekend. And I hope to see you on Monday for Monday Night Reset at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Remember, you guys, you're not alone. You're loved. Stay happy, healthy, and safe. And I'll see you next time. Bye.